Hey, I want to take some time today to address some people that get some things wrong about the Second Amendment. Mainly I'm talking to two groups of people, FUDs, who think that the Second Amendment is all about hunting, and the self-defense people that think the Second Amendment is about self-defense. The Second Amendment actually has nothing to do with either of those, directly. Indirectly it does, but directly it is not about those things. Hunting and self-defense, those are other individual rights. They are completely separate from the Second Amendment. If the Second Amendment didn't exist and you didn't have guns, you'd still have a right to hunt, be it with a bow or a club or whatever. You'd still have a right to self-defense, be it with a bow or a club or whatever. Those things are not because of the Second Amendment, and the Second Amendment is not because of the importance of those things. And people make arguments all the time that the Second Amendment is so important because of self-defense, or the Second Amendment is so important because of hunting, when neither of those things have anything to do with the Second Amendment directly. And I think we kind of undermine the real importance of the Second Amendment when we bring those things into the Second Amendment. Those things stay separate. They're completely separate. The only reason they have anything to do with each other is the courts have upheld, and this is common sense, that if you are allowed to own a gun because of the Second Amendment, well then if you're allowed to defend yourself and you're allowed to have a gun, therefore it makes sense that you be allowed to use your gun to defend yourself. And if you're allowed to hunt and you're allowed to own a gun, therefore it would make sense that you're able to use the gun to hunt. Because guns are, let's face it, probably the most effective tool for hunting and self-defense. So they do have a lot to do with each other, but these two other things have nothing to do with the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment has to do with only one thing. It's very clear. The Second Amendment is all about the rights of citizens to own firearms so that they can form a militia in defense of the people against the government. Be that federal government or even state government that can fall under federal government control. That's all the Second Amendment is about. It just says we are allowed to own firearms and weapons, arms, period, with no infringement, period, like I just said a second ago. That is all it says. It says because it is so important that the people maintain power and that they be able to fight back against their government if it becomes corrupt. Because the Founding Fathers were very worried about corrupt governments, and I think we're seeing why nowadays. So that's all the Second Amendment is about. It is about anyone that is of legal militia age, which the militia age is determined by if you're eligible for military service, but you're a civilian. You cannot have soldier members of militias. It is an all-civilian force. So anything that makes you a soldier, being in the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, therefore you're not a member of the militia. That's a standing army. And the founders were very against standing armies for very good reasons. Now, they are necessary in today's time, but we still have to be able to stand up and defend ourselves against our government, regardless of the standing army. In fact, it makes the Second Amendment even more important because we have standing armies. Now, I know a lot of people are going to say, well, people would never have a chance against the army if they had to, even if they did form together and form a militia and fight back. Yeah, they would. That's the most ridiculous thing I ever hear people say. Like, they're like, oh, they'll just nuke us. They're not going to nuke people on their own territory. The government isn't going to be able to get away with that. If anybody's been in intel or pays attention to the world, they know that one of the number one things we do to destabilize a regime is to arm a small number of rebels. Because a small number of rebels operating on your soil can be more trouble for a large government or a corrupt government than any outside standing army. So we would stand a chance. And often we wouldn't have to be able to fight back enough to defeat the government. We would just have to fight back enough to win public support. Like when the police came in the middle of the night to get your neighbor, if he just took him silently, you might never know anything about it. But if he was able to hold them off for 12 hours because he's armed and it makes the national news and everyone sees it, well then that would rally public support. So that's why the Second Amendment is important. It's not important because of self-defense. It's not important because of hunting. Those things are important on their own and have their own reasons to be important. The Second Amendment is purely about us as citizens, basically anyone between the age of 18 and whatever the mandatory retirement age of the military is, being able to rise up as a militia, to be able to form a militia from the citizenry. And militia is defined as pretty much, like I said, anyone that's in that age grade, and it's defined as a civilian force that rises up against a standing army. Not just in support of, it can be in support of a standing army or it can be against a standing army. So when they talk about the need of a militia, that means the citizens have to have the means to organize and stand up. Anyone in that age bracket that can legally own a gun and legally serve in the military have to be able to come together with enough arms to make a stand against an oppressive government. That's the only thing the Second Amendment is about. And I'm not belittling hunting or self-defense. Like I said, they're both very important, and they both do involve guns because we're allowed to own guns. But the reason we're allowed to own guns is the Second Amendment. And the Second Amendment is not about either of those things. It's about the people keeping power over the government and the government not having power over the people. And we gotta not forget that. And when we argue the Second Amendment, we have to remember that's what it's there for. We need to expressly state that's what it's there for. That's the only thing it exists for, and that's the most important reason it could possibly exist. Even people on the left, if they hate Donald Trump, they're never Trumpers or whatever, they should understand why it's important for people to be able to rise up if someone tries to take control of the government, or the government becomes corrupt and not for the people, which it's closer and closer to every day. So that argument, I think, is more persuasive with anybody on the left than self-defense or hunting. Because a lot of them would be like, well, I'd rather die than shoot somebody. But I think they understand what it's about like to have a government become oppressive. So I just wanted to ramble on about that for a little while here in a little rant, because it kind of bothers me when people tie the Second Amendment so closely to things it really isn't about. When really the thing it is about is the most important argument we should be making. It's the only argument we should really be making in defense of the Second Amendment, because it's what the Second Amendment is about, and it's the most important thing we can stress when we defend the Second Amendment.